I'm going to kick off Get Lit number 6. Woo! And welcome you all tonight. I'm really happy you're here. And let's see, where shall I start? Okay. Last week, one of the books I talked about was this book, Milk Fed by Melissa Broder. And what I want to mention is that she's going to be at an event at the Free Library of Philadelphia. Hi, Dana. And if I think I did mention before, for those of you who don't know about the wonderful events at the Free Library of Philadelphia, you should get on their mailing list. And now that, you know, these days it's all virtual, so even if you're not in Philadelphia, they have really terrific events. And a friend of mine who is an author, Nomi Eve, the author of Henna House, is interviewing Melissa Broder on Thursday night at 7:30 for a free library event. So I want to recommend that. I can send out a link so you can register. So that's thing number one. Thing number two is an article, thanks to Marga for sending me this, from the New York Times about something that happened in publishing recently. And we seem to, because of the Times, a lot of our publishing news these days is politically related. And this has to do with the big five publishers who we've talked about, and they're still big five because the Random House purchase of Simon & Schuster hasn't been approved yet, have not really been publishing a lot of MAGA books. And except for this one editor at Hachette, which is one of the big five. Her name is Hartson. She's 67 years old. She once ran a small press specializing in dogs, had, as the Times said, had all the trappings of a liberal book editor. But now she works for Hachette. She's a true believer. Somebody's got background noise, so please mute. She's a true believer in Donald Trump. And she's published a lot of books. She published Triggered by Donald Trump Jr. She published Corey Lewandowski. She published Unmasked Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. And last month she got fired. She said that she believes she was fired for her politics. The publisher denies it. And the publisher said that they have learn the lessons of the Capitol siege of January 6th, no hate speech, no incitement to violence, no false narratives. And they have made it separately clear to both editors and agents that they're shifting back toward think tank conservatives and away from fire-breathing politicians.
For them.
So that's our publishing news this week. Two other things I'll share with you. Steve is not here tonight, but he sent me some information after I talked about Amanda Gorman, the poet from the inauguration. And he sent me a link with a history of inaugural poems and also an episode of a show called Poetry in America that looks at Robert Hayden's sonnet, Those Winter Sundays. And among the people who are discussing the sonnet in that episode are Joe Biden and also Angela Duckworth, who wrote Grit, which I'm sure many of you know. It's a terrific book. So I'll send you all those links. Okay, now I'm going back to PowerPoint tonight and I'm going to share some stuff with you. Okay, I can't really see the chat when I have the PowerPoint open, so if you have a question, please just call my name. Okay, last week we had so many new books and there were actually a few that I didn't talk about, sorry, and I realized that I really should mention them to you. So this is a biggie. Kristen Hanna is very, very popular. I don't know if any of you are fans of hers, but this is her new book. Amy, that's a yes. I see you clapping. This takes place in Texas in 1934. Millions are out of work and a drought has broken the Great Plains. Farmers are fighting to keep their land and their livelihoods. As the crops are failing, the water is drying up and the dust threatens to bury them all. One of the darkest periods of the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl era has arrived with a vengeance. So that's the setting for this book. Another big book that came out last week, Walter Mosley. If any of you are fans of his detective stories, The Easy Rollins, this is number 15. Number 1 was Devil in a Blue Dress. Highly recommend it if you like mysteries. This takes place in 1969. There are protests going on in the background, and Easy Rollins, who is a Black private detective, gets a visit from a white Vietnam veteran who comes to Easy with a story that makes little sense. So that's the setting of this one. And then finally, also from last week, this new biography of Mike Nichols. And Mike Nichols burst on the scene when he was still in his 20s. He was half of an improv duo with Elaine May. They were hugely successful. Next, he directed 4 consecutive hit plays, won back-to-back Tonys, ushered in a new era of Hollywood movie making with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, and followed it with The Graduate, which won him an Oscar and became the 3rd highest grossing movie ever. But he has very humble roots. He was born Igor Pechkowski to a Jewish couple in Berlin in 1931. He was sent to America with his younger brother in 1939. He had some kind of allergic reaction on the boat that rendered him permanently hairless, and he was bullied by that. And yet he came back and became who we know him to be. So this is a biography that what was noted about it is that it looks equally at his successes and his failures, which I think is interesting because we certainly have read a lot about how failures help us succeed, right? And one more book from last week, real quick, My Year Abroad by Chang-Rae Lee. He's a very highly regarded novelist. Maybe his best known book is Native Speaker. You might know him for that. He's known for his restraint in his writing, and apparently this book takes a different tack. It has a very complex plot about a guy named Tiller who starts out as an ordinary college student, winds up accompanying a brilliant Chinese entrepreneur on his travels across Asia, and then winds up living in an anonymous town with a mother and her son who are in the witness protection program. The New Yorker says, Tiller's voice, buoyant and sure of itself, whoops with joy, a precious commodity these days, and not just in fiction. We do not always want to hear how sad and bad the world is, how poisoned the future, how feeble our nature, and Lee knows it. My Year Abroad is one big song and dance number, an optimist's treat. So I think if you like big, quirky books, this is a book for you. Okay, now I thought it would be interesting to take a quick look at the reviews of the novels that I looked at last week that we talked about and see how my review compared with other reviews. This book, I'm going to read quick excerpts from some of the reviews. This novel at times feels relentless. It includes murder, rape, sexual assault at gunpoint, incest, child abuse, domestic violence, and the death of a baby. I expect art to reflect all parts of life, even the most painful, but there were times when the novel's portrayal of its Barbadian protagonist tilted more toward the nihilistic than the realistic. A compelling and terribly sad story of lives defined by trauma, generation after generation. Okay, so this is not a reviewer who's saying, if you're looking for happy, read this book. Okay, this book we talked about, and the reviews say, an engaging, though overly complicated story of 2 people fighting to overcome their circumstances. In this ambitious, if flawed novel, Masood charts the unraveling lives of 2 Muslim immigrants. Despite many insightful moments, Masood's characters never fully come to life. Still, the immersive story offers a rich meditation on religion and personal identity. So that kind of goes along with what I thought. Okay, we talked about this book. Explores fragility, grief, and the effects of mental illness in this wonderfully strange novel about new love between broken people. As dark and tense as it is flirty and humorous, this moving novel offers consistent surprises. So it may tell you something about me if I tell you that and I read that review and I think, oh, I really want to read this book. But you'll remember this is the book about the woman who's a therapist who sees the guy trying to jump off a bridge, and she stops him from committing suicide, and then she takes him out for coffee, and then she winds up taking him home. And I just think it's a compelling plot. This one we talked about, about the neighborhood in Long Island, this sort of futuristic thing where the neighbors kill one of the families in their house. So the review of this said it explores, an incredibly dark and surprisingly fun page turner. And NPR says Sarah Langen's Good Neighbors is one of the creepiest, most unnerving deconstructions of American suburbia I've ever read. She cuts to the heart of upper middle class lives like a skilled surgeon and exposes the rotten realities behind manicured lawns and perfect families. And the result is horrifically plausible. You will read this and be enthralled, but you will never look at your neighbors the same way again. So if you like psychological thrillers, I think this is going to be a really good book. And then the other creepy book we talked about last week was Girl A, which is the one about the parents who chained and tortured their children. And reviews say it's a haunting, powerful book. The mystery at its heart is not who committed a crime, but how to carry on with life in its aftermath. And they say the writing is really strong. It's bleak, but its bleakness never becomes overpowering, and the story is gripping, so the pages keep flying. A great debut announces the arrival of a strong new voice in psychological thrillers that's not afraid to go into the shadowy corners where bad things happen and their memories remain. Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler. They say it looks at the way the internet muddles us up. This is her first novel. Apparently, she is known as the sort of combative literary critic whom writers hate and readers love. They mention her perceptiveness and bracing disregard for the niceties of literary politicking. She is a gifted cultural analyst, and her debut novel is, among other things, a fascinating work of cultural analysis. And Kirkus said, not bad as social commentary, not that great as a story. And then City of a Thousand Gates in Israel. The novel digs into the enduring wound of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and offers an unflinching, unforgiving look into the harsh realities of the occupation and its impact on people's lives. And there was a review of this book in the LA Times by an Israeli who said, an American novel that manages for once to get Israel right. So there you go. Now, last week I mentioned this book and told you I'd look into it a little further. I feel like this is a really important book. It is, Kendi, you may know him for his How to Be an Anti-Racist book. And this is basically, I talked to a customer about it today and they called it an encyclopedia. It kind of is. I mean, it's a history book, it's an oral history, it's an anthology. It's a compendium of essays and poems chronicling 400 years of Black American history, starting in 1619. They say that the essays were written in 2019, and they break history down into chunks, each being 40 years, and they ask each writer to write about a certain period in history. And then at the end of each section, they have a poem that they had commissioned to cover this period. So it's 80 essays and 10 poems. Some examples, the opening essay is by Nicole Hannah-Jones, who is the creator of the 1619 Project. And that is the symbolic birth date of African America when 20 Negroes stepped off the slave ship in Jamestown, Virginia. And the book ends with an essay by Black Lives Matter co-founder Alicia Garza. So it's a big book, and it covers everything from the transatlantic slave trade to the Harlem Renaissance, Brown versus the Board of Education, the Black Power movement, the war on drugs, Hurricane Katrina, voter suppression, just on and on and on. So that is that book. Now we're jumping to today. Elizabeth Kolbert is the author of The Sixth Extinction, which is a book that some of you might know. One way to look at human civilization, she says, is as a 10,000-year exercise in defying nature. Now she's looking at how certain interventions that have imperiled our planet are increasingly seen as the only hope for its salvation. So, for example, she meets biologists who are trying to preserve the world's rarest fish, engineers who are turning carbon emissions to stone in Iceland, Australian researchers who are trying to develop a super coral that can survive on a hotter globe. So she's looking at the damage we've done to our planet and how we might be able to save it. So I don't know if you know much about Priyanka Chopra Jonas. I'm not a huge reader of celebrity memoirs. She's 37 years old, but there's more complexity to her experience than I realized. She's been in the public eye since she won a major beauty pageant 20 years ago. She calls herself a product of traditional India and its ancient wisdom, and modern India and its urban bustle. She says this is a good time to take stock of her life, having recently married. For those of you who know her husband, Nick Jonas, from the Jonas Brothers. She says, it's probably the first time as an adult that I felt the desire to look back and reflect on how I've gotten to this moment. So if you're interested in a 37-year-old looking back, this is the book for you. Not quite the same as a celebrity memoir we looked at 2 weeks ago by Cicely Tyson, who was 96. But for one review from the Hindustan Times says, a deeply honest and open account of her experience navigating life in the public eye, as well as the extreme hard work and dedication she put into her career.
Lynn?
Yes.
Do you think there was any coincidence that Cicely Tyson's book came out and she died that week?
I have thought about that a lot, Jean. I really, I'm not quite sure what to say about it. There was a part of me that thought, I wondered if she died before they published the book and they kept it a secret.
Or they wanted the press that she died that would sell the book. One of the, you don't know. You don't know. I just thought it was so coincidental.
It was, and I mean, whatever it was, interestingly, when the book came out, it wasn't really selling that well, and then she died, and it completely sold out.
I'm sure. Yeah.
And continues to sell. So, as somebody joked, it's a really good publicity stunt, but you can only do it once.
That's right.
I don't know. Maybe she just finished the book and died. You know what I mean?
Well, there's something to be said for that, right? Like, I mean, that's why I'm sort of being cynical about a 37-year-old writing her. I mean, she has every right to write a memoir, and I'm sure she has interesting stories to tell, and maybe she has a big fan base, but I felt like maybe for Cicely Tyson, it was something she had to get done. And then she finished it and she was finished. Yeah.
She may have wanted to last long enough to see its publication.
Yeah. Yeah, she might have held on.
I can imagine that.
Yeah, I can too. I mean,
We'll never know. We'll never know.
We'll never know, but she sounds like she was an extraordinary woman.
Yes.
Yeah.
And she was. And her contribution to Black life and to our artistic culture can't be underestimated. Okay, next. This is a novel by Laird Hunt. I really like Laird Hunt. Some of you may have read Never Home with Me, which is a really cool story based on some true stories of women who dressed up as men and went to fight in the Civil War. And this is one particular character who sort of goes on her odyssey in the Civil War. And I just really liked how he sent a woman on this odyssey in that book. So I'm a big fan of his. This is also about a woman's life. In the first chapter of this book, we meet Zori, who is living home alone in like Indiana farmland. She's getting older. She's always been very strong and known as a hard worker, but she's starting to fail physically. So we're sort of seeing something near the end of the story in the beginning of the book. And then we flash back to her childhood in Indiana. Her parents died when she was young. She was sent to live with an unloving aunt. Then when she dies, she has to make her way in the world all by herself. And so you want to watch and see what she does and how she makes it. One thing she did in the part I read so far was she winds up in Ottawa and works as a radium girl. So you hear those stories about how they were painting with this glow in the dark paint and licking the paint brushes to make the right tip on the paint. The writing is very stark It reminds me of Elizabeth Strout in Lucy Barton, that sort of Midwestern setting. So if you like that, I think you might like Laird Hunt. And Zori is one of those tough, unsentimental women who probably have a very interesting story to tell. So that's a new novel published today. Here's another new novel, The Paris Library. It takes place in 1939. Young and ambitious Odile Souchet has it all, a handsome boyfriend and a dream job at the American Library in Paris, but then the Nazis arrive and she joins the resistance to try to save the books and the library. But when the war finally ends, instead of freedom, Odile tastes the bitter sting of unspeakable betrayal. And then we flash forward to Montana in 1983, and we meet Lily, a lonely teenager who starts to befriend her solitary, lonely, elderly French neighbor. And soon we will find out how these two are connected. So I can say two things about this book. One is I love the author's bio. It says she, wait, I'll tell you exactly. It says she divides her time between Montana and Paris. And the other thing I will say about this book is that this is something that I can really go on a rant about because I hate it, because every single work of women's historical fiction has this same damn cover of the back of a woman in period clothes looking at some scenery. So there you go. That's how you know it's historical fiction, because you're looking at a woman's back. Rant over. Next book. This is, oh my God, totally different world. Psychological thriller, family on vacation in Barcelona. The mother works for the FBI. The daughter gets kidnapped and the mother wants to find her. That's a really quick summary of the story. Again, lots of great new psychological thrillers out. If that's your genre, I think I'm going to wait for the movie of this one. This is a book that really caught my attention. This is a young woman who graduated from Princeton, went off to Paris. See, you're looking at the front of her, not the back. This is a memoir, and discovers very young that she has leukemia and is not given a very good prognosis, but then she survives. And I'll just read to you a quote from Tara Westover, who's the author of Educated. She says, "Between Two Kingdoms will resonate with anyone who is living a different life than they plan to live. This is a propulsive, soulful story of mourning and gratitude, and an intimate portrait of one woman's sojourn in the wilderness between life and death." Doesn't that sound beautiful? So that is it. And since I know that you want to know what I'm reading, this is what I'm reading right now. So we talked about Ethan Hawke in one of our meetings, and I am reading this book, and I'm going to turn off the screen. So the Ethan Hawke book is good. Hi, Kathy. It's really good. It's good. I don't remember if I talked about it much, but the plot is about an actor who cheats on his wife, and that becomes a big scandal. And simultaneously, he's in rehearsals for Henry IV on Broadway. So it's basically Ethan Hawke's life, but it's good. It's really good, and I've really enjoyed the perspective of being in the play and what it's like acting Shakespeare. And then the Children's Bible by Lydia Millette is a good book that got on a lot of best of 2020 lists. And it's a story of this group of families who rent a vacation home somewhere in the Northeast on a lake, and their kids kind of run wild. It's told from the point of view of the kids. The kids really disdain the parents. They think they're gross and fat with baggy skin and gray hair, and they do yucky things like have sex. And so the kids, and then a big storm comes. So this is also climate fiction. And after the storm, things are different. So it's a little bit, feels a little bit Lord of the Flies to me, but it's really good. So that's my wrap up today. Does anybody have any questions or comments after I threw all this at you? Or want to tell me anything that they're reading that they're enjoying?
Anxious People.
Oh, Frederick Bachman, Anxious.
Love it. It's so good.
It's good.
I'm glad. I'm glad. I have not read him, but I met him once at a book expo, and we asked him the correct pronunciation of his first book, and he said it's Uva, like Hoover.
Oh, that was a good one.
A Man Called Uva.
That was
Uva.
good.
Yes.
Actually, I'm reading Beartown.
I love that
Oh,
one.
there you go.
That's
More
about
Frederick
hockey.
Bachman.
Great book. Did anybody read his book? My grandmother told me.
To Tell You I Love You.
Yes, I did.
No,
I
to say-
can't remember it though, but I read it.
It was so unusual, so
I
clever.
loved it.
Not easy to get through, but when it's so worthwhile if you stick with it.
All right,
It's
so we got a lot of
it's
Frederick
one of my
Bachman
favorites.
fans here.
It was one of my favorites. Loved it.
Interesting. Okay. Anything else? Anybody else?
I'm reading simultaneous. Actually, I just finished it. A memoir called Hollywood Park by Michael Gillette.
Yeah, I've seen it. Is it good?
Yeah, very good.
Oh, okay. Hollywood Park.
He grew up in a cult, and
Oh,
it's all, you know, it's about the complicated relationships and his kind of journey. And he ended up, he's in a band, the Toxic something. I never heard of them, but apparently they're a well-known band. So
okay. That's great recommendation. Thank you.
that was really good.
Good. Yeah, I like reading memoirs. I like reading memoirs. All right. Well, unless anyone has anything else, then I will just, before we adjourn, remind you to please email me with anything you want me to talk about or any questions you want me to answer. I can be your publishing answer lady and muse.
All right.
And we'll come back again next week with more good stuff.
Yes.
Great.
Lynn,
Thank you.
Lynn,
Yes.
be on YouTube also?
Yes, I'm going to, this has been recorded. I will post it on my YouTube channel, share it with all your friends, and tell them to join us. Okay? Thanks,
Thanks, that was
everybody
great.
from Florida and Boston and Delaware and everywhere you are. Thanks for joining me.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye.
Stay well.
I
Hey, Lynn,
Yes,
how are you?
I'm good. Hang on.
I didn't want to hang up. I